All right, let's dive right into it. A viral video analyzing a recent march in Houston is absolutely setting the internet on fire right now. In this explainer, we're taking a magnifying glass to its explosive claims. And look, our goal here isn't to take a side. Instead, we're going to look clinically at exactly how the speaker constructs a highly effective argument, layering ancient historical claims all the way up to a dire modern warning.
Right out of the gate, the speaker drops a heavy accusation. She says, "In America, you need to wake up, buddy, because you are looking at a Trojan horse," which completely sets the tone for the entire argument. By bringing in this specific Trojan horse imagery, she's telling the audience that what they're seeing on the surface, it's pure deception. She frames the events not as some benign act of free expression, but as a concealed threat designed to infiltrate from within. It's an incredibly effective hook that just immediately demands your attention. To keep things organized, here is our roadmap for unpacking how she builds this case layer by layer. First, the Houston March catalyst. Second, the 1979 Iran comparison. Third, 7th century conquest claims. Fourth, reinterpreting the Karbala battle. And finally, the warning to America.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the Houston March catalyst, which is the inciting incident for this whole commentary. So the video begins by zooming in on a very specific event in Houston, Texas in 2026. The speaker observes people marching, holding what she actually describes as beautiful signs with messages like "Stand beside the oppressed," "Hussein stood against injustice." She even notes how moving and peaceful it all looks on the surface. But then, she introduces her counter-perspective. She states, "Except I'm Iranian and I know exactly what I'm looking at." Notice that crucial rhetorical pivot right there. She's using her personal identity as both a shield and a sword, instantly claiming a level of authority that demands the viewer's trust. Moving on to Section 2, the 1979 Iran comparison, from the Paris of the Middle East to revolution. To really explain why this Houston march alarms her so much, the speaker transports us back to pre-1979 Iran. She describes a thriving, free country. We're talking women serving as judges and doctors, a vibrant music scene, and a capital city famously dubbed the Paris of the Middle East. And then, she violently contrasts this with the aftermath of the Islamic Revolution, the hijab becoming mandatory law, music being outright banned, and 9-year-old girls being married off. She's highlighting this jarring societal shift to really underscore the absolute existential stakes of what she believes is happening today.
So the crucial point she's making here is actually a chronological argument. She claims that the radical transformation of Iran, it didn't start with guns and immediate violence. According to her, it started with marches, just like the one in Houston. Marches featuring uplifting slogans about justice. She argues that once the revolution actually took hold, that's when the real oppression began, executed under the exact same banners of justice we saw in Houston. She's explicitly warning us that totalitarian shifts begin under the guise of peaceful, progressive-sounding movements.
All right, Part 3, 7th century conquest claims, specifically the Arab-Islamic conquests. To deepen her argument, the speaker asks a rhetorical question: how did Iran become Muslim in the first place? And she answers by arguing it wasn't through people politely handing out pamphlets. Instead, she points directly to the 7th century Arab-Islamic conquests. She lists some very specific historical claims to back this up: invading Persia, destroying a 1,000-year-old Zoroastrian civilization, burning libraries, and instituting forced conversions or survival taxes. She also applies this historical pattern to Egypt, claiming the Christian Copts there were conquered, subjugated, and erased. By citing these ancient events in Persia and Egypt, the speaker forcefully frames her core thesis. She argues that what we are looking at is not merely a religion peacefully existing, but that historically it is an ideology of conquest. She's using this massive historical sweep to argue that the underlying nature of the movement is inherently expansionist and subjugating, no matter how it might present itself today. This brings us to Section 4, reinterpreting the Karbala battle, deconstructing the 680 AD narrative. Next, she pivots right back to the specific messaging used at the Houston March. She takes aim at the 680 AD Battle of Karbala, contrasting the popular narrative with her own assertion of the actual battle. She calls the popular version a romanticized victim story of noble figures dying of thirst in a barren desert, supposedly fighting for human rights. But her version? She argues the conflict between Hussein and Yazid was purely a political power struggle over the caliphate and the empire. She even points out a geographical discrepancy, noting that Karbala is definitely not a barren desert, but actually sits right between two rivers. According to the speaker, the romanticized version of Karbala is a deliberate fabrication. She basically defines it as pure political propaganda. She claims this specific historical narrative is actively deployed to manipulate populations, keeping them mourning and compliant. She even laments that her own people in Iran were not told the truth about this history, seamlessly tying historical revisionism directly to modern political control. It's a textbook argument for how historical narratives can be weaponized.
And finally, Section 5, the warning to America, the final thesis.
Let's unpack how she structures this ultimate warning. She traces a timeline of what she considers completely ignored alarms. She notes that the late Shah of Iran warned the West decades ago, and that Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi has been shouting the same warnings from the rooftops recently. She claims that this ideology doesn't just stay in the Middle East, it actively exports itself. To prove this, she points over to Europe, arguing it's already experiencing parallel legal systems where secular law is sidelined alongside massive cultural and demographic shifts. And the culmination of this timeline, fast forward to 2026, and the ideology is now marching in Houston, right in America's backyard.
She follows that up with her most direct and provocative comparison yet. While stating her belief in the U.S. Constitution and freedom of speech, she argues that the Constitution absolutely doesn't protect ideologies whose stated goal is to replace it. She directly equates political Islam to communism, asking a really pointed question. If America banned communism because it sought to overthrow the government, why is the country blind to political Islam, which she claims is attempting to do the exact same thing while utilizing constitutional protections like freedom of speech to march in the streets?
She wraps up her argument with this incredibly stark, jarring juxtaposition. She points out the bitter paradox of people marching for justice in America, fully enjoying democratic freedoms, while supposedly representing the ideology of a regime that, as she emphatically points out, publicly hangs people from cranes in Iran. It's a heavy, emotional closing designed to hammer home her plea to America. Do not let yourselves be deceived by the Trojan horse.
Which brings us to the core tension at the heart of this explainer. Look, regardless of where you fall on the speaker's specific historical claims, her video raises a massive, complex structural question for modern democracies. We want to leave you with this final thought to consider. As demographic and cultural shifts continue globally, how should democratic societies balance the ironclad constitutional protections of free speech with ideologies that critics argue actively seek to replace those very constitutions? It's an incredibly challenging question, and for sure, one that is going to remain right at the forefront of our public discourse.